Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Fantasy Friday. Today, we are going to be reading the final two chapters of The Tiger and the Wolf. This epic story is now coming to an end, and we're kind of at the final showdown now, where everything is culminated to this one point after all those months and months of running away. Mani is now in deep thought with Hespek, and they're traveling through the God's Land, trying to find her some solution to her two warring souls within her, the tiger and the wolf. Meanwhile, all of her pursuers, the tigers and the wolves, are fighting. Not necessarily fighting each other, but fighting against her band of protectors. Uh, we have Akrit coming in and doing some damage. We have Jolpe, the Tiger Queen, coming in, fighting, and everything's just crazy. We have a large morass of stuff happening. So let's go through these last two chapters and see if we can come to any sort of resolution. So here we are with chapter 47 of The Tiger and the Wolf. Stone River glared back at his followers, willing them to descend on Broken Axe and clear the way to reach Manayee. They would not. Some would even look at him in the eye, and still not rush to support him. Even Kalameshli would not come at his bidding. Their faith in him had been unraveling ever since the girl had run away, and every twist and turn of the trail had eaten into Akrit's place in the world until the footing beneath him was suddenly treacherous. Kill the girl, that was the answer. Even if another's hand held the knife, the girl must die at his order. He would show the wolf and the entire world that he was not to be denied, not even by his own blood. But Broken Axe still stood in the way, and though he was a smaller man than the cave dweller had been, he cast a longer shadow. Broken Axe, whose name was known to all the winter runners and many beyond, the great hunter, the wolf who walked alone. Every legend needs an ending, Stone River thought, and hefted his bear killer. He went in with a savage scything cut. Broken Axe stepped swiftly, ducking forwards under the stroke, so close that the iron edge must have split some hairs on his back. He struck Stone River's chest with his forepaws, going for the throat, knocking the man to one knee. Axe came at him again, fangs glinting, and Stone River met his leap with the bear killer's haft, throwing him off and lurching back to his feet. He was already bringing the falcons down. Broken Axe's wolf shape seemed to leap straight into the oncoming blow, and for a moment Akrit thought it would be as simple as that. His enemy stepped back to human, though, the handle of Axe's hatchet staying Stone River's stroke, and Axe's free hand curling about the shaft. Against the pivot of Akrit's own grip, Axe pushed the falx up and back, yanking it half out of his adversary's hands and twisting violently so as to lay the shaft across Stone River's shoulders and neck, bending him forwards. Akrit stepped. Either that, or he be at the mercy of the hatchet. He left his falx in his enemy's hands, turning even as he found his wolf feet, to chew at Axe's hamstrings. He got a boot in the muzzle for his pains, but he dodged aside from the hatchet sweep, drawing a little blood with his teeth as he snapped at his enemy's hand. Then Axe was a wolf as well, pale with a dark flash about his shoulders, bucking up to get his jaws to the back of Akrit's neck. Stone River beat him to it, and for a moment they were chest to chest, twisting as each tried for the throat of the other. They slipped sideways, and went tumbling over and over down the hillside, scattering the rest of Stone River's rebellious pack. Then Broken Axe was a man again, trying to pin Akrit down with a human's greater weight, his blade coming up. Akrit squirmed out of his hold, teeth ripping into Axe's forearm. The hatchet went spinning away, but, quick as water, there was a bronze knife in the man's other hand. It drove in, once, twice, and snapped against the iron that lay within Akrit's stepped form. Stone River returned to his true shape, getting a hand about Broken Axe's neck and throwing him down slope towards the trees. His hand found a familiar shape beneath it. His falx had come downhill too, ready for its master to reclaim. He lunged with it, finding his enemy unarmed and still regaining his feet. The attack was hurried, though, the long weapon tangling with the outlying branches of the trees, and then Akrit had a wolf at his throat again. He beat the animal away with a solid blow from the falx's haft, but already Axe was a man once more, his arms snaking about the weapon, his weight dropping suddenly to remove it from his owner's hands for a second time. His other hand found Stone River's face, the thumb groping for an eye. Akrit dragged his opponent down on top of him, and he ripped clear his strong iron knife from its scabbard and drove it into Broken Axe. He saw realization come to Axe as the blade sank deep under his ribs. The blood went out of the man's face, just as it was coming out of his body. Akrit knew he should fall back then, less for fear of any last trick of fists or jaws that his enemy might manage, but to give Broken Axe a chance to step, to let his soul go to the wolf. Instead, he wrenched the blade sideways, sawing viciously within his enemy, giving voice to his hate. Axe's hand was at his throat, but the grip was weak. Still, there must have been strength left somewhere in the man, because, with a great shuddering heave, he became a wolf at last, even with the terrible wounds Akrit was carving into him. Shuddering, he dropped off Stone River and fell over onto his side, panting once, twice, and then no more. Akrit lurched to his feet, the reddened knife held high. "Well?" he demanded of his people, for surely now they were his forever and forever. But they just stared with wide, frightened eyes. In the distance, Mani could hear voices as if echoing across the far hills. There was the laughing men girl, Shiri, demanding to know what she was supposed to do, saying that someone was fighting and that he was fighting alone against. And someone was in pain, the small sounds of a great, great man sorely wounded, cursing through gritted teeth, hissing and snarling, and sometimes the sounds were those of a vast bear on the point of madness, and sometimes of a man, just the same. And Hesprick, that strange young girl's voice that was still Hesprick's voice, was speaking calming words to both of them, and the dog with its agitated "Yoff, yoff, yoff!" But there was no answering "Mat, Mat, Mat!" And the hilltop, that real hilltop with the stones, in the world of men and beasts. Mani felt as though it was the one stationary point, and that all the rest of the wide world, from the mountains to the Southerners' vaunted river, was being slowly twisted about that anchor. There were many great beasts she had passed now that she could tread the road of possibilities between her souls. Bears and huge wolves, great cats and other hunting beasts never seen before by human eyes. They were like ghosts. She could not reach them or make them real, call out to them as she might. Nothing was interested in answering her summons, and the world twisted tighter and tighter about its center. Something must surely tear, and soon. And, with that thought, something did. The more she had sought a new soul, the more her two natures grew restless. The further she had hunted away from the tiger and the wolf, the more the animals within her had clawed and howled to be let out. And now, with a great heaving, vomiting rush, they broke free of her, shattering the bonds she had placed about herself, leaping from her shadow to become things in their own right. A tiger and a wolf, the bitter mother, the callous father. And they would fight each other. They would fight forever, but first they would finish their work of destroying her. She was where the tiger and the wolf were united. She was the halfway creature that neither could bear to live. And so she ran across that uneven landscape, stumbling and tripping over her two bare feet. Behind her loped the beasts that had escaped from her mind, her own souls hungry to seize her in their jaws and tear her in two. And worse was what she knew herself to be, an empty vessel, and that thought it was a girl, a soulless thing, no better than the plague people in the stories. How could she be real when even her own souls wanted to consume her? But still she ran, the instinct stronger than reason or religion. She skittered fleet-footed across the gods' lands, and the gods looked down, disinterested, and turned their muzzles and their snouts away from her frantic cries for aid. And at last she could run no more, scrabbling halfway up a steeper hill that was far from any landmarks she might recognize. She slipped back down, feeling her nails break and skin tear, railing at the terrible frailty of a mere human form, knowing the hot breath of her own birthright as it prepared to devour her. And so she turned, standing at bay at last, and saw those two familiar shapes pad out to confront her, one gray as shadow, the other flickering with red embers. These were the beasts of the wild, the killers and eaters of men, the howlers and snarlers in the dark, the winter runner and the shadow eater. and she had nothing but blunt human teeth and clawless human hands. They closed with her lazily, keeping a distance between them, the wolf to her right, the tiger to her left. Her feeble hands clawed at the substance of the god's land for aid. There was something hard under her fingers. Her hand closed on it. That was what her hand was for. She hefted the stone, and in a heartbeat she had thrown it, hearing the wolf yelp from the unexpected impact. That was what her arm was for. She had been crouched and cowering. Now she forced herself to stand tall, to stand on her own two legs. Her hands were reaching again, drawing the shadows into other shapes, as though even those mute things had soul. She had a knife, she had a spear, she had a club, she had a bow. But the two beasts were still closing in, though there was something cautious in their step now, a hint of wariness. I am not yours. Her voice sounded tremulous and high, but it was the only voice in all the god's land. She had a stick in her hand now, which was just a slender wand. She lifted it high. Part of her had caught its breath at what she was about to bring into this place of spirits. You are mine, she challenged them, the wolf and the tiger. You were born from me, and you shall go back to your place. I am your master. You shall hunt at my bidding, or not at all. And she struck the stick against the ground, and it blazed forth with fire. She saw its light gleam back from their startled eyes. She saw it race across the gods' lands, and the lesser beasts there shied away from it. Only those great, implacable creatures of myth she had come to seek were able to stare without any fear at the specter of a human hand holding a blazing brand. I am Manayee! I am Manytrax! She yelled to her recalcitrant souls. And you are mine! You are no more than my shadow! And she brandished the flame at them, first one and then the other, forcing them backwards, showing them that she was strong. She knew what must be done now, though she could not have said how this knowledge came to her. She planted the brand in that dark earth and stepped past it, letting her two-legged shadow stretch long and tall across the undulating ground. And, where it touched them, it showed the two beasts before her to be no more than shadows themselves. Wolf, tiger, human, all three just the shapes that the firelight cast outwards from her. And when they were back inside her, when she knew she had mastered them in this place, and they would not drive her mad any more, or fight each other within the confines of her skull, only then did she turn back towards the fire. On the far side of the brand, the flaring light was reflected in two eyes bigger than her fists, on teeth like ranks of knives. A beast had come down from its hilltop to gaze at her, at long last. The Macan was twisted free of Asmander's hand, its stone teeth gashing the fingers of the man who took it from him. He saw a knife curved like a claw raised up above him. Kicking out won him a second's respite as he got a heel into the tiger woman's knee, throwing the whole tangled knot of them off kilter. But when they had him again, and he stared into the narrowed eyes of his killer, something black came amongst them then, like a long streak of night speckled with the glint of stars. Yellow teeth flashed in its jaws, shearing at flesh and leaving ragged wounds in their wake. Claws dug and ripped and pried, prizing the scrum apart as though opening a clam. Arachaka still had Asmander firmly by the neck, but abruptly his limbs were unencumbered, and he gripped her arm, twisting it away. Her knife jabbed at him, but it slanted off the quill scales of the champion as he slipped from her grasp, just in time. Then she had fallen back along with the others, forming a loose ring of warriors and tigers with their queen in the center, facing the champion and his dragon. Venet stepped, rolling his broad shoulders, weighing the greenstone maret in his hand. The weapon of a chief, Asmander knew. Lesser warriors would use bone or wood or flint, not the hard jade rock that took long seasons to craft and retained its edge like nothing else. How hard it must have been for the man to bow his head, to relinquish his name and become a servant to a boy. When Asmander had given it all back to him, he was sure the old pirate would kill him, or try. Some part of him had been hoping for it. And now here he was, with his back to the rocks, his unnerving grin towards the tigers. Those coal eyes of his took in the fire shadow stripes of them, the shining bronze plates of their mail, the feathers cresting their helms. Don't we look pretty? He spat disgustedly. Asmander stepped, feeling the champion still just a breath away and eager to resume the fight. Did you forget something? He managed. That's how they do gratitude in Atalon, is it? Venet bared his teeth. Maybe a smile, maybe not. How are you still alive, boy? I keep finding old men stupid enough to save my life. Venet squared his shoulders as the tigers expanded their half circle, taking their places on both flanks. One had a javelin drawn back to throw, and the big cats were drawing themselves up to leap. Last time, I promise, Venet assured him. Asmander stepped again, the champion's bow-taut form closing about him. The tigers flinched back a little, confronting the alien majesty of that shape as though they were looking into the sun. A champion's soul burned fierce and free, torn from the deep time when its avatars had once walked the earth. And then it happened. They felt it, every one of them. The ground did not shake, but each of them, tigers, Venet, and Asmander himself, they all shifted their balance slightly, and all at once. Something had changed. Something new had come into the world. What are you waiting for? Standing over the body of Broken Axe, one foot planted on the dead wolf's blood-matted hide, Akrit Stoneriver bellowed to his followers. Go get the girl! Bring my daughter to me! Or is there another who would challenge me? And they were still staring, and only then did he realize that they were not staring at him. The Winter Runners stood in awe of something, and it was not their chief. Old Calameshly Takes Iron's old face was slack behind its tattoos. There was shock in his yellowed eyes, and there was fear, but there was something else to be read there, too. Akrit was abruptly aware that it was reverence. When he turned, he half thought he would behold the wolf himself. What came down from the hilltop was grander and more terrible than even that. It walked like a bear, on flat feet, with curved talons that gouged the earth where they touched, and it possessed a bear's heavy-shouldered bulk, not quite the size of the cave-dweller Akrit had just dispatched, but not so far from it. The monster's head was not the squat muzzle of a bear, though, but a long, grinning gape that had a great deal of wolf in it, were it not for the size. Those were jaws that could reach out into the night sky and pluck down the moon. Its eyes held the gold fire of the sun. Its pelt was black as a panther's, with a shimmer sheen of silver to the dense hairs, and its tail lashed the air like a cat's. There was something of a tiger's grace to it, too, despite its size. And, more than that, there was an aura that surrounded the creature of something more than natural. As it advanced down the hill, Akrit backed away until he was almost amongst his followers, for there was a terrible cold radiance that seemed to limn the creature, perceived only by the mind. The creature had halted at Broken Axe's body, staring down at it, and Akrit was half convinced this prodigy must have been sent by the wolf himself to bring home the soul of his fallen son. For the first time in a long while, he had a stab of doubt, beginning to wonder if he had done the right thing. And the huge monster stepped, and it was just slight Manii standing there, gazing with gleaming eyes at the dead animal, at the empty vessel that had once been Broken Axe. Akrit was finding it difficult to draw breath. He had reclaimed his bear killer, hands clutching white-knuckled on his haft. And there she was! He had only to rush her now, and he would be rid of her. And yet, if he shed her blood, the whole world would denounce him as kinslayer. None of them would understand. Kill her! He croaked. Takes Iron! Tree Striker! Any of you! Kill her! Kill her! Kill her now! At the sound of his voice, Manayee glanced up and looked him in the eye. She was shaking, and if it was grief that had struck her, she wore it like armor. It was a grief that peeled her lips back from her teeth and made her expression something terrible and savage. She was saying something. She could not hear what it might be. She was speaking, and then she cocked her head as though answered back. But she was his child. Disobedient and wayward as she was his. He bared his teeth at her, and saw their history reflected in her eyes, her life spent under the shadow of his hand, and he knew he could master her again, and he hefted his falx. If it had served as a bear killer, it would serve well enough to bring to heel whatever Manei had become. Then her eyes narrowed, and she stepped. She had not believed it possible until she saw the body. Only a wolf with a dark flash of fur across its shoulders, but just as the spirits here were an invisible presence, so the death of Broken Axe left an absence, a gap in the world. There was a man who had walked with wolves and tigers, who had fought alongside the bear. There lay the wolf who walked by himself, owning to no master save his own judgment. There was the man who had saved Manai's mother from the hands of the man who still called herself her father. There lay the man who had been hunted her across the crown of the world, the man who had been her friend in the shining halls, and who had fought for her freedom, even though it had cost him everything. There lay the man who had given her a name. And at last she looked up at Acrit Stone River, who was staring at her with his face clenched into such a tangle of hate and fear, horror and rage, that surely the knot of it would never come undone unless it was cut straight through. He was pointing at her, making demands of his warriors, of Kalameshli and of the world. And for once, the world was not listening to Acrit Stone River. For once, the sun and the moon did not move about his drives and wants and ambition. Instead, the world was watching her. "Can I do this?" she asked, as though Broken Axe might hear her. Within her breast, the tiger and the wolf that she was inheritrix to were both waiting. They did not strain against her any more. There was no rebellion left inside them, and if there was a madness in her, it was a different order, a thing divine. "Can I face him?" she whispered. A lifetime of blows, of spite, of callous little cruelties spread before her like a path of thorns. She looked on Akrit's face, and he still meant fear to her, as if her frightened, beaten past could have its own separate soul. If he raised a hand against her, she would cower back. She knew it. But the voice rose up within her, the other voice, as vast and measureless as the horizon, and it told her that she could. "My father," she murmured. But of course, he was not her father. He had never been her father. He was only the man who had tried to make her his. Her heart was rattling in her chest, her human heart, but she made herself meet Akrit's eyes, forced herself to do so, as though she held a knife to her own throat. She had intended defiance, but there must have been some yielding emotion on her face, because his eyes gleamed and he brandished the weapon at her, the blade that had carved up loud thunder, in the hand that had struck down Broken Axe. Here was the man who had harried her mercilessly back and forth across the crown of the world. And so she stepped, and called that champion whose lair she had found in the god's land. Its form enveloped her, the iron strength of its muscles, the thick leather of its hide. She stretched and felt a sudden, enduring power in every sinew, felt her new claws rake furrows in the earth, licked the jagged fence of her teeth with a black tongue. The great weight of it, the sheer power of her new shape, made Acrit Stone River take a pace back as she closed with him. She tried to build on that, rearing up and stamping on the ground, bellowing in a voice not like a wolf's or a bear's, or any animal's. His eyes were very wide, but he held his ground, and then, abruptly, he had stepped again, darting to one side and then towards her flank as a big grey wolf. She turned on the spot and swatted at him, missed his fleeting shape, and then felt the nip of him at one side. His teeth closed on nothing but thick tufts of her pelt, and a moment later she lurched at him, bringing her bare claw feet down where he had been, and forcing him to back off. But she could not fight well. Asmander, despite all his winged glory, had never flown. Just so for her. The shape was unfamiliar, its tolerances and capabilities unknown to her. For all her new body's strength and speed, she was like a woman drunk and unable to use it to its fullest, slipping, overreaching, chasing the swift-footed wolf, but never catching him. He would realize that soon, she knew. So far he was surely congratulating himself on his nimble speed, but he was no fool, and once he understood. And again he was a man, the falcon biting down towards her, but he had made the move too swiftly, still unnerved by the champion's reek of deep time that cloaked her. She shouldered into him, the haft of the weapon bouncing off her ribs, and then he was down, rolling frantically to get out of her way. She charged him, lumbering forth with a sudden access of speed, but he was stepped and out of reach long before she got to him. They faced one another, both panting. Downslope, their audience was the Winter Runners and Calameshly. Upslope, Hesprick was standing in that gap a broken axe had held for just long enough. The serpent girl would die too, if Manigee failed. She growled and slashed at Akrit, batting with her claws like a cat, sending him scuffling backwards, but then he was at her again. He rushed straight into her jaws, it seemed, but as she snapped at him, he was past her, dodging up the slope. For a moment she thought he was after Hesprick, and she wheeled clumsily. He was only after height, though, stepping back to human for that leap, then to wolf form for the extra distance in its lighter frame would lend him, and then he was a man once more, and on her back. She reared up onto her hind legs, snarling. It was exactly what he wanted. The hard wood haft of his falx slid under her throat until he had a hand at either end of it. His arms were only just long enough to manage it, to put a collar about that great neck. But, in the next breath, the neck was not so great, and he was pulling her human head against his mail-clad chest, the weapon's shaft crushing into her slender throat. And yet, he held off. He did not make that final twist or pull that would finish her. Instead, he roared at Calameshly, "Bring your knife, priest! Now! Finish her! Give her to the wolf!" And she realized that, enraged as Akrit was, he did not want to bring the curse of Kinslayer down upon his name. Her mind was very calm then, somehow. The champion was at the back of it, awaiting its moment, passing on to her mouthfuls of its strength. She gazed down at the Winter Runners, and met the eyes of Calameshly. The old priest shambled forwards, the little bones of his robe clicking and rattling. He had an iron knife in one hand, a piece he must have crafted himself, sweating at the forge as he acted out that secret knowledge known only to the wolf. Akrit held Manigee rigid, just able to breathe, unable to give voice to more than a choke. But her eyes spoke. Calameshly stood in front of her, the other scourge of her childhood who had whipped her and pushed her and challenged her, the man who had known of the tiger in her heart and hated it, but never told her father. And she had hated him back, with reason, for a long time, but at least she knew why he had been that man. He had been like iron, hard as his name, through all her childhood. There had been no love, no give in him. Now he looked like a wretched, defeated shadow of himself. "Accurate," he murmured. "Not your daughter's blood." "Do it!" Flecks of Stone River's spittle arced close past Manigee's face. The old priest raised his knife and lunged forwards with it, a movement so jerky and sudden that both Akrit and Manigee assumed he had stabbed her, instead of forcing its leather-wrapped hilt into her hand. She could not sever Stone River's mail, she knew, not even with iron on iron. He wore no helm, though, and she stabbed back past her own shoulder with the blade, close enough to draw a line of red across her own ear. It bit solidly into Akrit's face, and abruptly he was screaming, and the pressure was gone from her throat. And the champion was waiting for her, just like family, gathering her up in its might and power, and she swiped at Akrit with a paw and sent him tumbling back down the slope. He scattered his own men gathered there, but then found his footing, staggering upright with half his face clad in blood. He screamed at her. He raged, and she raged right back at him. And he was charging her again, first as a wolf to make up speed, and then as a man, with falx raised high. He was the chief of the Winter Runners. He was the terror of her childhood. She looked down on him, yes, down, and realized that the fear had gone from her at last. She roared at him in a thunderstorm of sound that slowed and slowed him further until he stumbled to a halt outside of her reach. He looked into her beast's eyes and saw that she was not his any more. She advanced with one stomping step after another, swinging her head and baring the daggers of her teeth. Something went out of him then, as though his mastery of her had been his last crutch, and now she had broken it. He had nothing left to hold him up. He backed off a couple of awkward steps, and then he became a wolf, fleeing like a swift gray shadow for the trees. He did not reach them. Mani could not have kept up with him, but another had been waiting for her chance. A form of fire and shadow dropped upon Akrit, raking and savaging, and then it was a woman again, in bronze mail, with knife and hatchet, and then a tiger again, her teeth crushing, her claws ripping until the weak points of his iron hide gave way. And sometimes he was a man, fumbling desperately against her savage jaws, and sometimes he was a wolf, shuddering as she stabbed and stabbed at his grey hide. But it was the end of him in either shape, and so it was that Akrit Stone River came to die. He died a wolf in the end. His soul would not be a feast for the tiger, and that was the best that could be said about the demise of Stone River. When she had done, Jolpe stood up and confronted Manii, first looking up into her great amber eyes, then down into her human ones. The Tiger Queen's reddened weapons were still in her hand, and there was a fighting tension in her to match. Manii took a deep breath. Do you seek to kill me now? Jolpe just stared at her, still wound up for bloodletting. From around the hill slunk her tigers, Arachaka and a handful of others, on two legs and four. If you fear that I might be a weapon used against you, Manii continued, then the hand that would have held that weapon is no more. She was very aware of the winter runners bunched together and nearer to her than the tigers were, inching closer, too, as though they were going to stand alongside her. That threw her, because she had expected nothing but enmity from them. Apparently, she was still theirs when tigers were about. Without her father to feed them his hate, they smelled the wolf on her. If it is just that the sight, the the knowledge of me, Manii went on, hearing her voice shake slightly, is impossible to live with after what was done, then, then you have killed the man who did it. I ask you to leave the hatred there with his corpse. Do not bring it to me. I have not earned it. And the tigers stepped back and forth, shifting to keep the wolves in sight, and then again as a handful of people descended from the hilltop. Hesprick was there and the three Southerners, and last of all came the slow and limping figure of Loud Thunder, a great bear with a single dog at his heels. The balance of power shivered and danced between them all, a ring of three war bands, with Manii at their center. At last, Jolpe took a long breath. It is not over, she declared. Manii felt the champion looming large in her mind, ready to come to her aid. Let it be over, she urged. He is part of this. Jolpe jabbed with her knife, and it was Kalameshli Take's iron that she singled out. I will have this man's blood. I will have his soul for the tiger. And, of course, she was right. Of course, the old man had played his part. Manai was living evidence of that. She glanced back at Kalameshli. The priest was staring levelly at Jolpe. Would he go forth and meet her, knife to knife? Perhaps, and he would die. He was old, and, though he was strong, he was no warrior. He had saved Manai at the end. She had left the iron of the knife behind when she stepped, but not the memory of his actions. If he had remained true to his chief, she would be dead. Manai wanted Hesprick's wisdom and Broken Axe's calm. She had only herself, though. It is your right to ask it, she replied quietly, thinking through all the words she might say. How can I say that you're not owed your revenge? Then give it to me, Jolpe demanded. Because I owe him my life. I owe him that debt. And because he is my kin, my blood. He is my father. The very act you are owed vengeance for is what put me here, what made me. What are you saying? The Tiger Queen growled. I cannot ask you to forget, but I am asking you, just this once, to stay your hand, for no other reason than your daughter asks it. I have nothing more than that, nothing to bargain with, save for that. For a long, silent moment, Jolpe said nothing, and all eyes were on her. Her lips twitched once, a muscle clenched in the corner of her jaw, her hands tightened on the hilts of her weapons. At last she spoke. What is this new shape you have, daughter? Is it some champion of the wolf that you have called out of the darkness? Is this what will hunt my people when the moon is high? And Manii found she could answer, for that was the one thing she had a full understanding of when she returned to her body from the god's land. I am a mother to wolves, she said softly. I am sister to cats. The blood of bears and hyenas runs in my veins. If I am a champion of anything, it is of all the beasts that rend flesh with tooth and claw. No one tribe has a claim on me. I am for all the crown of the world and beyond. Saying the words and knowing the truth behind them, she felt a sudden thrill of joy. And whose flesh will you rend? Jolpe asked her. Many took a deep breath. Whoever lifts a hand against my people. And who are my people? She thought. Everyone and no one, I suppose. Whoever I decide. The tigers were watching their queen doubtfully, sensing the shifting emotions within her. Asmander and Venator were poised to fight, Many recognized, and Shiri as well. The wolves were strung as taut as bows. Hespric, though, the dark girl caught her gaze and nodded, just the once. Centuries of watching the world gave the small motion weight. Hespric, at least, felt that Mani had found the right words to say. And then Jolpe took another long breath and cast her knife down before her, point first, into the earth. It is over, she declared, for a great invisible burden seemed to slough off her shoulders. For you, my daughter, I grant this. Let the old man be kept far, far from the lands of the tiger, and I will renounce my claim on him. I grant you this, because there is nothing else that I can give you. I have nothing else for my daughter but this. The words were said without remorse, flat and empty of feeling, but Mani's hide was thicker these days. They did not sting her as they once might. Wow, and that concludes chapter 47 of The Tiger and the Wolf. So many things happening. So we had the unfortunate death of Broken Axe. Accurate Stone River himself killed the man. At the very least, Broken Axe died in his wolf form. So tragic as it is, his soul will go on and be reborn within another, because in this book, reincarnation is a thing, so long as the human dies in their animal form. Their soul will live on within another. And then, depending on how you view it, could be a good or a bad thing, Accurate Stone River was killed by Jolpe. And it was also revealed, finally, if we didn't really catch the foreshadowing in the previous chapters, that Accurate Stone River was actually never Mani's father to begin with. He was unable to impregnate Jolpe, and actually Kalameshli Takes Iron is Mani's true father. Crazy stuff, crazy stuff. So the entire book was predicated on the premise that Accurate was Mani's father. Not the case, not the case. So he was under a huge misunderstanding and made many, many, many mistakes. And now it's all coming out into the open that, yeah, Jolpe is her true mother and Kalameshli is her true father. And Jolpe has just agreed to let Kalameshli live. So, wow, this might have massive implications. Let's find out what happens in the final chapter of The Tiger and the Wolf, chapter number 48. Up here in the highlands, the winter was gathering its pack, ready to go hunting in the lowlands. Mani could hardly believe that, back in those lands she called home, summer had only just spent its store of days. What a time to be traveling in this hard, cold country! But she had been called to where few outsiders had ever gone. Of all the people she had ever known, perhaps only Broken Axe had traveled into the high country of the cave dwellers. Perhaps not even he had been summoned here by their great mother. Long months had passed since the death of Stone River, of Broken Axe, and of much else. At the autumn equinox, she had gone to the stone place and shown herself to the priests of all the crown of the world, who had already heard rumors of what had come into the world. She had stood before them in that great bear dog shape, burning with the strangeness of it, walking the circle of the stones on feet the world had not known since before the memories of man. And then she had stood before them as a small wolf girl of tangled provenance, and seen in their eyes the fear and speculation. They had thought that she would come to hunt them, or to challenge them, or to rule over them. The most ambitious had thought on how to use her, the least on how to destroy her. She had seen it all in their eyes. And they would grow used to the idea, and perhaps she would only be the first, for Asmander had told her that he was by no means the only champion of the Riverlands. Hesperk said that when she stood in the God's Land and looked into those moon-round eyes, a new door had opened. At the stone place there had been too many questions, and she had let most go unanswered. Only those which would have tied her to one place, to one tribe, had she rejected outright. Those who simply said she would be welcome, that she could be their guest, she thanked. Those who came to her with their allegiance, well, that had become complicated. And there had been a command. Only one had been strong enough and self-contained enough to make demands of the new champion of the North. But when the mother of bears demanded her presence, Manayee went to her. Here she was now, up in the mountains, many days' travel past Loud Thunder's home. Here she had come, passing through high prairies, already past their brief and frantic time of bloom and growth, following the stream beds until she came to cliffs that were pocked with caves. Lone Mountain had greeted her solemnly. He was just as she remembered, taller even than the bulk of his people, and wearing linens and wools of bright colors to mark him out. The look he gave her was that of an equal, no deference for what she had become, but nothing in his eyes to acknowledge that the crown of her head did not reach much past his navel. She had tried her authority then, surrounded by these huge people, overshadowed on all sides, virtually underfoot. She had demanded to see Loud Thunder first, to know how he was healing, and they had frowned and shuffled and exchanged looks over the top of her head, but at last they had given in, with poor grace, and taken her to him. He was on his feet again, and well enough for her to feel a wash of joy overcome her. She had known men crippled by lesser injuries, but Hesperk had more than one lifetime of healing lore at her disposal, and she had done well with treating those fresh wounds. He still limped a little, and sat stiffly, one hand resting on Yoff's loyal head. They spoke of many things, of his mother and her plans, of the journeys of his youth, of those waiting in her future. And then word had come that she was wanted, that the woman who ruled these high lands was growing impatient. So here she now sat, cross-legged at a fire, while the mother of the cave dwellers regarded her thoughtfully. The woman was even greater than Manayee remembered, a huge slope-shouldered shape, clad in the hides of a score of animals, stitched and overlapping.
I thought you'd be bigger,
The woman muttered, almost a complaint.
show me what you have with you.
So many times Manayee had been asked that. There had been plenty who had wanted her to perform for them, to dance from shape to shape, just to prove that she could. She remembered what Asmander had said, when he was asked the same, and she knew it to be true. The champion was not for casual display. It was not called on lightly. But she guessed that the mother did nothing lightly, and so she stepped into the shape of the champion, her bear dog, and crouched there, head raised a little above her paws, looking the huge woman directly in the eye. Eventually the mother nodded, not seeming daunted, but just weary.
All I've heard is true. Take it away.
Mother, Manayee said, when she had stepped back, I have heard it said that you see the future. The great woman snorted derisively.
No art to that, she muttered. Tell me the sun will rise and you've told the future. But some see further. Some have better eyes. That old snake who was at the stone place back in the spring, he had good eyes, and good ears too, for he listened to every tribe.
Hesperk said something was coming, Manayee agreed. Something bad. He said that everyone he spoke to had some piece of it, some glimpse. And you've seen the same? The bear mother grunted. A child came in just then, 10 or 12, and taller than Manayee, with a wooden platter of meat and fish hot from the fire. For a while, the big woman just ate, as though she had entirely forgotten her guest. But at last, she grudgingly invited Manayee to join her, her calculating eyes showing that she had been turning over her thoughts.
Something, yes. Enough word, enough signs. Birds flying out of season or on new paths. News from the seal that the fish are schooling differently. Flowers in bloom, not seen for a lifetime. Too many bad dreams. Too many frightened children. And so we know something comes, but we're blind as to what. So we try to prepare.
You had Loud Thunder as your war leader? The mother laughed.
Huh, and what use did we have of him? Some half-hearted lessons in war to our hunters, and then he must go chasing across the crown of the world after his lack-wit wolf friend. And yet, so many changes in the world, and one of them sits right before me now. And so perhaps that was what we chose Loud Thunder for, to see that you became what you have become. You see, prophecy is even easier if you offer it after the event.
She worried some more meat off a goat leg and chewed thoughtfully.
I had thought a war between the wolf and the tiger might be the start of it, but now it seems this will not be.
With Stone River dead, there is none left so very desperate to be chief over the tiger's corpse. Perhaps the High Wolf to see what need be done, Many said, and the tiger keep to their places for now.
And this you have accomplished.
The girl shrugged. It is just a madness that passed from the world when Stone River left it.
And the coyote and the horse bring word and trade,
The mother mused.
and who knows what tomorrow's tomorrow may bring.
She leant forward ponderously, casting Many in her shadow.
And now what will you do, little one? For I hear you make the people of these lands nervous.
The chiefs fear that, if I am not theirs, I will threaten their power. They make me their guest, they speak kind words to me, some even offer themselves or their hunters as mates. But when I tell them I am not ready to settle, I see the worry in their eyes. The wolf tribes, yes, and the others too. I am too new in the world, and they remember Stone River and see him in me. They think I am ambitious.
And of course they have no reason to think so.
I cannot control what young fools do, Many snapped bitterly. The bear mother chuckled deep in her throat.
How disappointed they must be, those bold hunters, when you send them away.
Her eyes narrowed.
Or do you?
Most times they will not go. They skulk like dogs at the edge of my firelight, or hunt and bring me meat and hides. One or two at first, and then a handful, and surely there were more on the way. Misfits, mystics, and bravos out for glory and adventure, and all of them had decided that their best trail was the one left by her new footprints. They came to the champion and offered their weapons in her service, and so the chiefs of the crown of the world grew more nervous, and Mani could not keep from wondering what she might gain if she mustered these followers. What sort of power could she become with a war band at her back? And even before the equinox, where she had stood before those chiefs and priests and seen that she had gone in their eyes from being a bringer of peace to a harbinger of strife, she had seen her path. She wanted to give no man cause to strike out at her, but, more, she wanted to give herself no way to yield to temptation and strike first. She was no daughter of Stone River, but she had grown up in his shadow, and that shadow moved in her mind sometimes and whispered about what she might do. When I first fled the winter runners, I had a plan. The snake priest and I, we would fly south to his homeland. I know a man who brings a handsome offer to any iron wolves who might come to aid his chief. There by the river they love me so much. I will go south for a time. I will go with Hesprick and the Southerners and any who will follow me. I remember Broken Axe telling me that, when he was young, he and Loud Thunder did just that, fought battles and had adventures and saw strange lands. Now I shall do the same. And when I come back to the crown of the world, it will be more ready for me, I hope.
When you come back, it may need you.
There was a great deal of foreboding in the mother's voice, but Mani just shrugged. I've had enough of being gifted with futures. None of those I was offered ever appealed to me. Broken Axe, he made me his own. And so will I. And that is the last word of The Tiger and the Wolf. So, very interesting conclusion. Manny goes up north, meets with the mother of the bears, and they have a little colloquy. And then Manny decides she's going to take off because everyone in the crown of the world wants to either have her or destroy her. And they can't really do either. So she's thinking of maybe gathering a little warband and heading off south so she can kind of repay the debt uh, incurred by Hesprick, although he would not hold her to such a debt. But she probably wants to go help out and just see what the rest of the world is like too. I mean, she could go anywhere, do anything. She is one of the most powerful creatures on the planet at this point. She can turn into that massive bear, wolf, cat thing that she doesn't really know how to describe. And yeah, she can do just about whatever she wants. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting life. And there is a book 2 and a book 3 in this series. I am not sure I will read those, but if you're interested in the rest of this series, it is The Tiger and the Wolf by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and you can go ahead and check out the next 2 books. And very cool series. Very cool indeed. So, yeah, next week we're going to be starting a new book then. So, stay tuned for that. I'll keep it a secret until we reveal it on that next Friday. So, I look forward to seeing you all then. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Bye now.